Marcus Ellison was 38 years old, and the invitation had arrived in a cream envelope with his name written in a calligrapher's hand, which told him immediately that Simone had wanted him to come and had not wanted to appear to want it. Ed drove a 6-year-old Nissan Altima with a parking sticker from a community college on the rear bumper. He wore the same 3 blazers in rotation and kept his work boots in the bed of a truck he borrowed from his site manager on job days. Simone's mother had called him dependable once at a family dinner, and the table had gone quiet in the way tables go quiet when someone says a thing that was meant to wound but was dressed as a compliment. The engagement party was at the Ballantine Hotel, Charlotte's preferred venue for people who wanted to be seen celebrating. Marcus had received the invitation on a Tuesday. He had set it on his kitchen counter and looked at it for 3 mornings before he opened it. The man Simone was marrying was named Philip Gaines, venture-backed, photographed the kind of presence that filled a room by simply knowing it should be filled. He had proposed with a ring Simone had shown to every person she knew within 48 hours. She had posted the announcement on the same evening. She had tagged mutual friends. She had not tagged Marcus, but she had made sure the mutual friends would tell him what neither Simone nor Philip understood, what no one in that ballroom would understand until Marcus stepped through the doors. Was that the man they had written off as her transitional, forgettable? Quiet years, X had spent the last 3 years building something none of them had thought to ask about. The invitation said 6 o'clock. He arrived at 6:15, which was its own kind of punctuation. What happened in that ballroom would cost Simone nothing she hadn't already spent. But it would show Philip Gaines exactly what kind of ground he was standing on. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning before the party, Marcus was in his workshop before 7, which was where he usually started his days when a project was in the final phase, and the details needed his hands rather than his mind alone. The workshop was in the lower level of the building on Roselle's Ferry Road, a mixed-use property he had purchased 4 years ago and renovated across 18 months, 1 floor at a time. The upper 2 floors were leased to a graphic design firm and a physical therapy practice. The lower level was his. He had poured the concrete floor himself on a weekend with 2 former Army colleagues who owed him time and gave it without question. The walls were clean white. The tool organization would have satisfied a surgeon. He was finishing a credenza in white oak, a commission from a restaurant group in Noda who had seen his work in a colleague's office and asked if he did furniture. He had told them he did now. His grandmother, Ida Eliam, had told him once while he watched her press a quilt, "The quality of the stitch nobody sees is the quality of the man." She had been gone 11 years, and he still thought of her most mornings. She had raised him in a house on Beatty's Fork Road after his mother moved to Phoenix for work and sent money faithfully every month, and called on Sundays and loved him in the long-distance way that was the best she could manage. His grandmother had given him the close-range version. He had not resented his mother. He had simply understood that some people gave what they could and others gave more than they had, and Ida Ellison was the second kind. He sanded the credencia's side panel with slow, even strokes. The grain was coming up right. He had started this piece 3 weeks ago, and he would finish it tomorrow. He did not rush furniture. He did not rush most things. Simone had called him a planner once, the way some people called a person quiet as though it were a diagnosis. They had been together for 2 years, 2020 and 2021. The insulated years when the world had contracted and 2 people could confuse proximity for compatibility. She was vivid and social and needed rooms the way some plants needed particular light. He had loved that about her at first. By the second year, he had understood that he was furniture in those rooms. Present, tasteful, not quite the point. She had ended it in March of 2022 over dinner at a Thai restaurant on Central Avenue. She had been composed and prepared, and had clearly rehearsed. She told him he was wonderful and steady, and that she needed someone who matched her energy. A had driven home and sat in the workshop for 2 hours, and then gone to bed. And the next morning, he had gone to work, because that was what he did. And the work had always been honest with him, in the way that people sometimes weren't. He had not heard from her again for 14 months. Then the invitation arrived. He set down the sandpaper and pulled his phone from the workbench shelf. One unread message from his business partner, Raymond Cole. "You still going tonight?" Marcus typed back, yes. Raymond's response came in 4 seconds. I'll have it out front at 5:45. Marcus set the phone down and looked at the credenza. The grain ran clean and uninterrupted from one end to the other. Some wood gave you that when you chose it right and didn't force it. He was not nervous about the evening. He was curious. There was a difference. His office phone, a separate line he kept for the development business, showed one missed call from a number he recognized as belonging to a commercial real estate broker named Sandra Tate. He called her back from the workbench. She confirmed that the closing on the Cornelius mixed-use parcel, $2.3 million, cash purchase, 60 days to close, was on track for the following Wednesday. He thanked her, ended the call, and went upstairs to make coffee. The second phone, the business line, went into his inner jacket pocket when he left for any formal occasion. Simone had never known about it. She had never asked what he carried, or why the inner pocket of every jacket he owned was slightly weighted. She had not been curious about the interior of his life, only its exterior presentation, and the exterior had been carefully modest for reasons she would understand tonight. Some things, he thought, were worth the patience to build right. He had 3 calls to make before 6 o'clock, and he made them in the order they needed to be made. The first was to Patricia Banz, his attorney, who had been managing his business in corporations for 5 years, and who knew the full architecture of what he had built and what it was worth. It did not need legal counsel for an engagement party. It called her because she was the person who understood the complete picture, and because he wanted one person who knew everything to know where he was going and why. You don't owe her anything, Patricia said when he explained. I know, he said. That's not what this is. She was quiet for a moment. Then what is it? He thought about it honestly. Documentation, he said. Of a different kind. Patricia made the sound she made when she understood something she did not necessarily endorse. Call me tomorrow, she said. The second call was to his uncle Jerome, in Concord, his mother's younger brother, who had been a pipe fitter for 30 years and had the particular wisdom of a man who had worked with his hands in difficult conditions for a long time and had come out the other side without bitterness. Jerome had met Simone twice during the relationship and had said nothing critical to Marcus's face and everything necessary to Marcus's mother on the phone, which Marcus knew because his mother had related verbatim on one of their Sunday calls. She's going to see you walk in, and she's going to want the ground to open, Jerome said. That's not the point, Marcus said. I know it's not the point. The point is Philip Gaines. What do you know about him? Enough. Does he know anything about you? He knows what she told him. Jeremy laughed, a short, full sound. Then he knows nothing. He paused. You remember what your grandfather used to say about poker? Marcus did. The man who knows what he has doesn't need to tell you. Go enjoy your evening, Jerome said, and dress right. The third call was brief. Raymond confirmed the logistics. Raymond Cole had been Marcus's business partner since 2021, a former logistics manager who had come in as operations lead when Marcus's development company had expanded beyond what one person could manage. Raymond was 45 years old and drove a black Escalade for personal use, and had the unhurried manner of a man who had never needed to perform urgency because things simply got done around him. He and Marcus had built 3 properties together. He understood, without being told, what the evening required. The Rolls-Royce Ghost was not Marcus's primary vehicle. It was not, if he was precise about it, primarily a vehicle at all. It was documentation. It was the single external expression of a position that had no other need of announcement. He had purchased it 14 months ago, cash, through his holding company, and he had driven it perhaps 8 times. Raymond drove it more often, when clients needed to understand the scale of who they were dealing with. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. Marcus dressed at 5:15, dark charcoal suit, the one from the tailor in Atlanta he saw once a year. White shirt, no tie. A decision, not an omission. He looked at himself in the mirror for a practical amount of time and then turned away, because the suit was correct and nothing further needed assessment. Raymond had the Ghost at the curb by 5:40. Midnight blue exterior. Interior in cognac leather. No vanity plates. The building's parking attendant, a young man named Tyrus who had worked the Roselle's Ferry property for 2 years, stopped mid-sentence when he saw it and looked at Marcus with an expression that contained a question. Marcus said, "Lock up at 9," and got in. The drive to Ballantyne took 22 minutes. Marcus sat in the rear seat and looked out the window at the city he had been building inside of for 12 years, its skyline familiar and unfinished, always becoming something. It was not rehearsing anything. He was simply present. Some men built beautiful things. The best ones knew when to stop building for the wrong people. The Ballantyne Hotel's motor court held 4 vehicles when the Ghost pulled in: 2 sedans, a Range Rover, and a catering van. The valet, Akit in his early 20s, saw the car from 20 feet away and came forward at a pace that was almost involuntary. Marcus stepped out, gave his name, and walked toward the entrance. It was 6 minutes late. The party was already populated. The ballroom was the Ballantyne's third-floor event space, high-ceilinged, dressed in cream and gold that Simone had clearly spent time choosing. There were perhaps 90 people. A jazz quartet in the corner, servers with champagne on round trays. It recognized 7 or 8 faces from the 2 years Hay and Simone had spent in shared social circles. He noted who saw him and what they did when they did. Simone was near the center of the room with Philip Gaines and a cluster of 4 people who had the body language of recently formed alliances. She was in a deep burgundy dress. She looked exactly as she always had, vivid, composed, performing warmth at a high and consistent level. Philip was taller than Marcus had expected. He stood with the particular confidence of a man who had been rewarded for his appearance since adolescence and had built his self-concept on that foundation. He had his hand at the small of Simone's back, and he was scanning the room the way people scanned rooms when they wanted to be sure everyone knew they were the reason for it. Simone saw Marcus at 30 feet. He watched her process the sight of him, the slight recalibration, the decision to proceed as planned. She excused herself from the cluster and came toward him, which told him she had prepared something. "Marcus," she said, and her voice carried the warm condescension she deployed when she wanted to establish a register. "I'm so glad you came." She half-turned to a woman standing nearby, an older friend, someone's aunt by the look of it, and said with a practiced lightness, "This is Marcus, my loser ex." She smiled as though the word were a term of endearment, a joke they all shared. The woman smiled back uncertainly. "He actually showed up. I love that." The room in their immediate radius had not gone quiet yet. That would come in a moment. Marcus looked at her. He did not change his expression. He sighed, simply and without heat. "Congratulations, Simone. You look well." It turned and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. He was speaking to Raymond on his phone. A brief exchange when the motor court valet, the same young man from 20 minutes ago, came through the ballroom side entrance and found the event coordinator and said something to her in a low, animated voice. The coordinator, a professional woman in her 40s who had managed 100 events and knew the weight of certain information, walked to Philip Gaines's best man, who was also apparently managing logistics. She leaned in and said something. The best man looked across the room toward Marcus. Philip noticed and followed his gaze. Marcus was talking to Jerome's former colleague, a retired contractor named Wendell, who had been on Simone's guest list through a mutual family connection and who had known Marcus for years through the industry. Wendell had already asked 3 questions about the Cornelius parcel. Marcus answered them without raising his voice. The room came to Philip before Philip came to the room. That was the nature of information in a space like this. It traveled socially, through expressions and whispers, and the slight shift in a person's posture when they understood something had changed. By the time Philip crossed the ballroom, 6 people had already drifted toward the windows that overlooked the motor court. The Ghost was visible from the 3rd floor, midnight blue, still, entirely unhurried. Philip introduced himself with the handshake of a man who had decided the handshake would establish something. Marcus returned it evenly. "Nice car," Philip said. "Thank you." "What is it you do, Marcus?" The question was framed as casual. It was not casual. "Development," Marcus said. "Commercial and mixed use, some residential." "In Charlotte?" "Charlotte, Concord, Huntersville. We're closing a parcel in Cornelius next Wednesday." Philip absorbed this. "We're actually looking at some investment opportunities in that corridor," he said. And the shift in his register was something Marcus had heard before. The pivot from social positioning to transactional interest. It happened quickly in men like Philip. I know, Marcus said. I've seen your fund's term sheets. We operate at a different scale. The silence that followed was brief and complete. Simone had drifted back within earshot. Marcus did not look at her. He looked at Philip Gaines, who was rearranging something behind his eyes, and said, "Congratulations on the engagement. She deserves someone who matches her energy." He used her phrase because it was the right phrase, and because precision mattered. He set his champagne glass on a server's tray. He buttoned his jacket, sighed good evening to Wendell, nodded to the event coordinator who nodded back with the professional composure of someone processing something unexpected, and walked toward the exit. The motor court was cool and quiet. Raymond had the ghost idling at the bottom of the steps. The valet held the rear door. Marcus did not look back at the ballroom windows. He knew some people were watching. It did not require their seeing. The building on Roselle's Ferry Road would stand whether or not anyone looked at it. That was the nature of things built correctly. He had built them correctly. 7 months passed, the way good months pass, full and unremarkable and accumulating into something solid. The Cornelius parcel closed on a Wednesday in November, on schedule, as parcels tended to do when the preparation had been thorough. Marcus broke ground in January. The project was a mixed-use development, 12 residential units, 4 commercial spaces on the ground floor. A courtyard, his landscape architect had designed around 3 mature oaks he had refused to remove. The budget was $3.8 million. He was managing it without outside capital, which was the way he preferred to work. He had taken on a second mentee at the development firm, a 26-year-old named Andre, who had the raw instincts for the work and the impatience of someone who had not yet learned what patience was actually for. Marcus gave him the time because Robert Hayes had given him the time and because the work was only meaningful if it moved forward through people. In February, through a project meeting with the city's planning department, he had begun a conversation with a woman named Renata Birch, who was a structural consultant working on a municipal project in Optimist Park. She asked questions that stopped at nothing convenient. She had the focused quality of someone who was genuinely interested in answers rather than the performance of asking. They had dinner in March. In May, she had a drawer at his apartment on 7th Street, which was not something he had planned and was not something he regretted. He heard about Simone and Philip through Wendell, who was connected to everything through 30 years of industry relationships, and who mentioned it the way he mentioned most information, plainly, without editorializing. Philip Gaines's venture fund had taken a significant loss in the second quarter on a Southeast Corridor development deal that had been undercapitalized from the start. 2 of the fund's limited partners had withdrawn. The engagement was still on, as far as Wendell knew, but the date had been pushed twice. Marcus registered this. He did not dwell on it. Simone had called once, in February, from a number he recognized, but had not saved. She had not left a voicemail. He had not called back. There was nothing unkind in that decision. There was simply nothing that needed to be said. It was in the Cornelius site on a Thursday morning in June, when Andre called him over to look at a framing issue on the 3rd floor. The problem was minor, a measurement that had come in 2 inches off in a corner junction. But the fix required thinking through the downstream impact on 2 adjacent walls before touching anything. I stood with Andre in the framing and walked him through the logic. Not what to do, why to do it, how to see the whole structure from one small decision. Andre listened. He wrote nothing down. I would remember it anyway, because the lesson was the kind that became part of how you thought rather than what you knew. The morning light came through the open framing and fell across the subfloor in long pale sections. Outside, the 3 oaks stood where they had always stood, their roots undisturbed. It was free. It was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.